In the bustling streets of New York, specifically in Times Square, the excitement of New Year's Eve filled the air. The protagonist, lost in his thoughts, glanced at his watch with dismay. He questioned the time that had passed and lamented the absence of his companion, remembering that they had promised to enjoy the event together. However, he realized that this would be their last meeting and that he was not the kind of romantic who sought a replacement. With a sigh, he decided that the best course of action would be to return to the hotel. As he walked, he felt a strange connection with the crowd, even though he couldn't see anyone's face. There was something in that eye contact that unsettled him. Suddenly, he bumped into a stranger passing by. Without thinking, and before the clock struck midnight, he was swept up in the moment and kissed them. The surprise and excitement of that instant made him forget, if only for a moment, the sadness that had accompanied him throughout the night. Share. New. Edit. Continue. Bookmark message. Since it is very common in America to kiss strangers on New Year's, I say according to because I have no idea. After the New Year's kiss, the stranger looked at the protagonist and asked for his name. The protagonist, feeling that they would never see each other again, replied that his name was Ryle, a nickname that no one knew. The boy smiled and introduced himself as Ash. Ryle, intrigued, commented on the color of Ash's eyes, to which Ash said he didn't mind sharing it. At that moment, another boy interrupted the conversation, asking if Ryle was there. In his mind, Ryle sensed a familiar scent that reminded him of Omega. Looking at Ash, he told him that they would see each other next time. As he walked away, Ryle reflected on the falling snow, feeling that it was the last time he would see it. There was a sense that he had left something behind and wished he could look back, but he knew there was no need to calm the childish Omega within him. Everything seemed to return to normal, without consequences, and he convinced himself that it wouldn't happen again. I'll tell you the truth, I don't even know who the protagonist is XD, but let's continue. Suddenly, Carlyle woke up and exclaimed that he had had a useless dream. His roommate, still half asleep, asked if he was awake. Carlyle suggested that he sleep a little longer, but his roommate reminded him that he hadn't slept in a long time. In his mind, Carlyle thought about Robert, the Omega he saw once a year. He identified himself as Carlyle Frost, an alpha, thanks to his mother, the daughter of Marquis Frost, a mixed blood with noble lineage. His grandfather was a very strict man regarding lineage. Carlyle continued to reflect on the belief that aristocratic blood could produce a dominant alpha, which represented only 1% of the population. He had been forbidden to meet the same Omega every time he was in heat, as he could not fall in love with an Omega that the family had not chosen. When he grew tired of the delicious, he was given inhibitors, although he couldn't use them often because he had a younger brother who suffered the side effects of those medications. Then his roommate told him that he had something to say and that he couldn't do it right. Carlyle, confused, asked what he meant, but he acknowledged that he was right. The roommate insisted that he should call Mr. Milan to inform him about the situation, as that was part of the contract. As he headed for the door, Carlyle told him to go ahead and call. Days later, Carlyle visited the doctor and, upon entering, remarked how long it had been since he last saw him. The doctor responded affirmatively, reminding him that he had mentioned a problem when being with his partners. Carlyle, somewhat frustrated, replied that there had been no alteration in his condition. The doctor explained that there could be several reasons for his situation. Impatient, Carlyle urged him to just tell him the results. The doctor, surprised by the urgency, agreed and mentioned that, according to the record of his physical exam and his form, he probably already had some suspicion, but it seemed to be something psychological. If he had to categorize it, it would correspond to a sensation disorder, as there was nothing wrong with his physical function. Carlyle felt pathetic realizing that he never thought he would be in that situation. The doctor continued, mentioning that, according to the consultant, the reason could be that the young master felt obligated and overwhelmed by maintaining an active lifestyle. In his mind, Carlyle reflected on the psychological diagnosis and wondered if that was really the outcome. The doctor, reiterating his analysis, stated that these were reasonable results. Carlyle, skeptical, expressed that he really didn't see the connection between what the doctor was saying and his supposed illness. The doctor clarified that he meant Carlyle felt that his activity was more of an obligation or a means to feel as if he had fulfilled his duty. Carlyle, with a challenging tone, reminded him that he was a member of the Frost family, and that the doctor was the physician in charge of the Frost family. Carlyle thought about the Frost family, known for producing dominant alphas and inheriting the title of Marquis from generation to generation, obsessed with maintaining a pure bloodline. This twisted belief held that to conceive a dominant alpha, the lineage had to be pure. Generations of dominant alphas came from aristocratic ancestry, and in many ways, a dominant alpha was considered superior to a normal alpha, like Kyle, Carlyle's younger brother, who was a dominant alpha. Carlyle reflected in his mind that he was not a dominant alpha like Kyle, but he was an alpha with aristocratic blood. He thought about the need to be with an omega from a noble family, and how he constantly changed partners. Everything seemed to be part of a plan from his grandfather since he had his first heat. The doctor, aware of his thoughts, explained that activity was closely related to the mental aspect and that mental burden also affected function. Carlyle, nodding, replied that he could see that and asked what the treatment was. Dr. Luther, with seriousness, gave his personal opinion, suggesting that Carlyle should be with someone who was an omega. Later, Carlyle found himself sitting elsewhere, thinking that it was already 6 o'clock. He told himself that if he quit, it would be his last chance, and that it was foolish to have a relationship just for interest. The confusion and pressure of his lineage kept him trapped in a dilemma he didn't know how to resolve. Delicious interest, wink wink. Carlyle knew it was a dangerous attempt. His thoughts were interrupted by Jones, a young man with straight hair, who asked if he had been waiting long. Carlyle replied that he hadn't. Noticing the wind, Jones mentioned that he had made a reservation at a nice place and suggested they leave. They soon arrived at a luxurious restaurant, where Jones asked what he would like to drink. Carlyle told him to choose first, and Jones decided to order apple cider. The waiter, upon hearing the order, blushed at the sight of Jones's cute face, which Carlyle noticed and thought that, as expected, Jones was a very different person from him. He reflected on how Jones socialized unnecessarily, exchanging friendly smiles with everyone, so unlike his own way of being. He wondered if it was really necessary to do that. While watching Jones, Carlyle remembered that he was with someone who had been introduced to him by his brother's partner. He realized that he had missed the right moment to ask him something more meaningful. The discomfort of the situation enveloped him, and the difference between them became increasingly evident. If I'm not mistaken, this person Jones had already kissed the protagonist on New Year's. Carlyle thought he had missed the right moment to ask Jones something. While they waited, Jones suggested they talk a little about what was going on, mentioning that he had heard Carlyle had a problem. Carlyle nodded, confirming that it was true. Jones, a bit nervous, admitted that it was his first time doing something like this and that he didn't know if it would help, but it would be good to establish some rules first. Carlyle, confused, asked about those rules. Jones explained that, to be honest, their first meeting hadn't been a very pleasant experience. Carlyle, remembering the kiss in Times Square, commented that maybe that moment didn't mean anything. Jones, surprised, said he wanted to ask him the same thing, as he had thought Carlyle didn't want to see him again after that. In his mind, Carlyle recalled that Jones used to date Nicholas before he started dating Kyle. He apologized for what had happened, but Jones clarified that he didn't expect an apology. Carlyle promised to be more careful, which pleased Jones. Then, Jones told him it was his turn to talk. Carlyle, confused, asked what he meant. Jones asked him to also share what things he didn't like or didn't want to do. Carlyle reflected and mentioned that he hoped there wouldn't be unnecessary feelings between them in the relationship. Jones, surprised, asked if that worried him. Carlyle, feeling a bit uncomfortable, asked if he was offended by his request. Jones assured him that he wasn't, explaining that he was just helping at Nick's request and that he didn't have to worry about that, as he couldn't fall in love with someone like him. Carlyle, relieved, replied that that was great and that everything was clear. However, in his mind, he felt disheartened, thinking that clearly Jones didn't remember him and that he was nothing more than a burden. The conversation left him with a sense of emptiness, questioning his place in the lives of others. At that moment, the food arrived and Jones, looking at Carlyle, commented that he had never dated a guy like him before. If he had made him feel bad, he asked him to tell him right away. Carlyle responded that there was no problem. Jones, relieved, suggested they return to what they were talking about. Carlyle mentioned the duration of their agreement, and Jones proposed thinking about 2 months. They both seemed busy, so he suggested meeting on weekends. He assured Carlyle that if there was an emergency, he would let him know 2 hours in advance. Carlyle, nodding, told him he would also give a day's notice. Jones, smiling, suggested they see each other 8 times. If nothing changed, he thought it would be better for Carlyle to consider seeing another expert. 3 weeks later, at Carlyle's home, one of the maids asked him if he was sure it wasn't necessary for her to prepare breakfast. Carlyle replied that it was fine. The maid, a bit hesitant, reminded him that a guest was coming today. In his mind, Carlyle thought it was the 4th time she had asked if he was okay, and that he had already told her not to worry about today's guest. However, Maya was so insistent that he wondered how the symptoms that had lasted more than a month could disappear so easily. As he reflected on the day he was with Jones, he remembered that after that they talked for about an hour. With a simple goodbye, Jones left first and didn't seem excited. They had spent just over 3 hours together, and Carlyle thought it would be more natural if he were the one to reach out. The maid interrupted him, calling him young master. Carlyle assured her that he was really fine and asked her to go rest for a bit. Maya, smiling, told him that next time, he should please introduce her to his guest. Carlyle agreed and accompanied her to the front door. After saying goodbye to Maya, Carlyle reflected that he was the only one using that house in the family, which was natural. At that moment, the doorbell rang, and when he opened it, he found Jonas and Jones, who was holding a bouquet of roses. Jones asked if he had come to the right place. Carlyle invited him in. Jones, admiring the house, commented that it had an old style and that it was a beautiful mansion, asking for a tour. Carlyle, surprised, asked if he really wanted him to give him a tour of the house. Jones, apologizing, told him that if he didn't like the flowers, he could throw them away when he left. Carlyle, in his mind, reflected that, apart from at his graduation ceremony, he had never received a bouquet of flowers. He told Jones that he didn't hate them. In his mind, he thought that the more they were together, the more firsts he experienced. Jones, relieved, confessed that he also liked flowers. Carlyle wondered if that was how feelings were confessed, by giving flowers and saying they liked them. Jones called him, pulling him out of his thoughts. Carlyle apologized, admitting that he had gotten lost in his reflections. Jones, smiling, asked if he had interrupted something and if he had work. Carlyle replied that it wasn't the case. Jones, with a smile, told him that the flowers suited him well. Carlyle thought that he really wasn't used to compliments like that. Then he asked Jones what his favorite flower was. Jones replied that it was the roses of the color Carlyle was holding in his arms. Carlyle, a bit skeptical, commented that he didn't think they were very common. Jones explained that, although they weren't anything special, red roses produced a romantic image by themselves and that he believed they were the flower that most symbolized love. The conversation flowed between them, filling the atmosphere with a subtle tension and a new understanding. Carlyle, listening to Jones, thought that love was irrelevant. He then commented that it seemed Jones liked romantic stories. Jones nodded, admitting that he did, and wondered if that was too silly for Carlyle. To be honest, he didn't care what others thought, even though they mocked him for believing he was naive. Carlyle reflected that everyone had different values. However, Jones argued that there should be at least one person like him to be in proportion. Jones asked Carlyle to show him around the house. As they walked through, Jones noticed a piano in the living room and asked if Carlyle knew how to play it. Carlyle replied that he used to play sometimes, but not anymore because he didn't have anyone to listen to him. Jones insisted that there was someone there and asked him to play the piano for him. Carlyle, surprised, agreed, even though he hadn't expected that. He said he wasn't good enough, but he hoped Jones would enjoy it. As he played, Carlyle thought he could remember a song that Jones might like. Although he wasn't a dominant alpha, he had a good memory and could recall what he had eaten for breakfast the day his brother was kidnapped, the day he debuted in society instead of his younger brother, his grandfather's expression, and also the day he kissed Ash. When he finished, he told Jones that it was okay if he didn't like it. Jones, smiling, assured him that it was the most beautiful performance he had ever heard in his life. Carlyle, a bit uncomfortable, replied that that was too much. Jones continued, saying that he had never heard such a beautiful piano performance, and asked what the name of the song was. Carlyle told him it was called Liebstrom, which meant dream of love. Jones, interested, asked him to explain the meaning of the title. Carlyle explained that it was a dream of love. Jones smiled, enjoying the meaning. Carlyle wondered why Jones smiled so much, whether it was a habit or if he truly enjoyed the song he had played. Then he offered him some tea. However, Jones replied that instead of tea, he wanted to eat something else. The conversation flowed between them, filling the atmosphere with an unexpected connection and a new understanding. And well, these two got mega playful. And you know what I mean, wink wink. Jones wanted to eat a lot of ice cream. After that encounter, Carlyle thought about how the stars shone in the sky above them. He remembered the fresh taste of lemon meringue that lingered on his lips, and how the chilly summer breeze wrapped around their souls. He inhaled the fresh scent coming from Ash's body, and felt that everything about that moment was beautiful. Looking up at the sky, he wondered if the night sky had always been so vast. He reflected that they would meet 5 more times after that, and couldn't believe that 3 weeks had already passed. Time flew, and that kiss had been enough to melt him. The smile on Ash's face as he looked at him was bothering him. Carlyle realized that, although he didn't want it to come, the end was inevitable. He was falling in love with someone for the first time in his life, and the object of his affection was named Ash. The next day, Carlyle visited the doctor again. While waiting for his arrival, he thought he had some time before heading to the airport. He was going to travel to Vancouver for business. It would be his first time in Canada, and it wouldn't be so bad if Kyle came along, even though that meant it would be this weekend. When the doctor arrived, he told Carlyle that he had been waiting for him and noticed some changes in him since the last time they saw each other. Carlyle, skeptical, replied that seemed unlikely. The doctor observed that he appeared to be in a much brighter mood. Carlyle, however, confessed that he didn't feel particularly good or bad, but leaned more toward the bad side because he wouldn't be able to see Ash that weekend. The doctor, jotting down notes in his notebook, asked him to tell him all about his physical state lately. Carlyle, a bit hesitant, began to say that he had been seeing positive results. He felt embarrassed to say it, but he didn't dislike the treatment plan. Although he probably would never fully get used to it for the rest of his life, he paused in his mind, thinking about the rest of his life, and wondered why he was thinking about that. The doctor, noticing his distraction, asked if he was saying he had been with someone and hadn't had any problems. Carlyle confirmed that was correct, and at that moment, he remembered what Jones had told him in his last consultation. The problem he had experienced was caused by the pressure when he was with someone, but now that he had been able to overcome that, he would be satisfied without having any action. Carlyle, feeling embarrassed, thought that Luther must keep a record of everything said there. He wondered if it would be normal to start feeling some kind of attachment to them. The doctor explained that a cocktail of chemicals was likely being produced. Passion and love were not the same, but passion could definitely be the vehicle that produced love. Carlyle, reflecting, admitted that if he was honest with himself, he would choose to see Ash more if he had the option, even though he knew he had no reason to want to see him more. The doctor, recognizing the situation, mentioned that his partner must be a good person. Carlyle nodded, confirming that he was. The doctor continued by asking what his plans were for the next week during his routine period, and if Mr. Jones agreed, he asked if he would like to spend that time with him. The conversation left Carlyle with a mix of hope and anxiety as his heart raced with the possibility of a future with Ash. After his visit to the doctor, Carlyle found himself in Trafalgar Square. As he walked, he was writing a message to Jones that said, "Good afternoon, Mr. Jones." He recalled something Dr. Luther had mentioned, that he wanted him to do what he wanted. That seemed like a funny thing to say, but he didn't feel quite right. He thought it would be much better if they had a call later or something like that, and that meeting in person was also important. At that moment, Ash Jones came up behind Carlyle and told him that it was a nice message he had sent. Carlyle, a bit surprised, replied that they were outdoors and in broad daylight, wondering if it wasn't a bit too close. Jones, unfazed, asked if he had had lunch. Carlyle, with a gruff tone, returned the question, asking if he had had lunch. Jones explained that he had just returned from lunch with a client, and then asked what Carlyle was thinking, recalling the last time they were together. Carlyle, feeling uncomfortable, clarified that the text message had been sent to him by mistake. They then headed to the National Portrait Gallery. There, Carlyle noticed something between Jones and a girl, as they were both chatting animatedly. The scene stirred a mix of curiosity and jealousy in him as he observed how the connection between them seemed to flow naturally. Jones saw Carlyle and told him that he had made him wait, apologizing for that. Carlyle, looking down, replied that it was no problem and handed him the tickets. Jones, noticing his demeanor, asked if something was wrong. Carlyle, a bit awkward, admitted that he could smell another alpha on him and that it made him feel a little uncomfortable. He asked Jones not to pay attention to it. Jones, surprised, asked if he didn't like that. Carlyle, as an alpha, explained that it wasn't exactly pleasant. Jones suggested that he could cover the smell of another alpha with his own. He then reminded Carlyle that he also had the scent of an omega on him. While sniffing Carlyle's hands, he commented that the scents they had picked up the last time had faded a lot. Carlyle, feeling a bit exposed, mentioned that other people could see them and that if he moved, Ash would move with him. Jones, concerned, confessed that he feared he might surprise Carlyle, and that was why he hadn't left much of his scent behind. However, he suggested that next time they should leave a lot for each other. Carlyle, confused, asked what he was saying. Jones explained that this should prevent other alphas from leaving their scent on him. Carlyle, a bit hesitant, told him that he really didn't have to do that. Jones, with a smile, told him that he knew something about Carlyle. Carlyle, feeling intrigued, asked him to continue. Jones, in a playful tone, commented that it was all a mystery to him. Carlyle, feeling a connection, asked if he agreed. In his mind, Carlyle thought that the feeling was mutual, and that was what he really wished he had said. As they walked, looking at works of art, Jones, holding Carlyle's hand, said that he loved Leyendecker and the paintings of waterhouses. He commented that when he was at exhibitions, sometimes bidders would buy pieces that he particularly liked. Carlyle, interested, mentioned that he imagined Jones must like The Soul of the Rose. Jones, excited, confirmed that he really did and expressed his disappointment at not having been able to make it his own. Carlyle, remembering Jones's gesture, thought about how he had brought those red roses the last time they were together, and asked what he was there to see that day. Jones replied that he was looking for a piece by someone named Michelle Whitewood, mentioning that he had heard it was still on the market and had to be somewhere around, although he hadn't seen it. Upon hearing the name, Carlyle stopped and, pointing to a work, told him that there it was. Jones, surprised and grateful, told him he was very clever. Carlyle, modestly, commented that he would have eventually found it while browsing the gallery anyway. Jones, relieved, said that now that he had found it for him, he had to buy it. Carlyle, in his mind, reflected that Jones said things like that when he had barely done anything, finding him a puzzling man. Jones continued talking about Michel, mentioning that he had never met him but that he was Philip's son. He added that his favorite painting by Philip Whitewood was Lavender Fields. Carlyle, curious, asked if he owned that painting. Jones replied that he didn't, explaining that the only 2 paintings by Philip had been sold a long time ago. He commented that Philip had stopped painting after that, and that the painting was impossible to buy now, not because of the price, but because no one knew who the current owner was. Carlyle, in his mind, considered that maybe he should get involved, but he stopped, thinking it wasn't his business. He observed the work and noticed that the person in the painting seemed caught in the action of turning around. In the side profile, he could see in the flowers the artist's feelings. That painful and contemplative expression conjured a deep emotion, like the feeling of falling in love. As Carlyle got lost in his thoughts about the painting, Jones interrupted him, saying it was a work that contained such strong emotion that he didn't believe he would see another like it again. When he looked at Philip's painting, he felt a deep desire, but he excused himself for a second, mentioning that he had to finalize his purchase. Carlyle, nodding, replied that of course. The atmosphere filled with a mix of anticipation and excitement as Jones prepared to make a purchase that meant a lot to him. Carlyle watched how Jones's passion for art lit up his face, and he felt that the shared moment was special.